All right, we're live. Scott Horton, antiwar.com, Jeffrey Tucker, Liberty.me, and Foundation for Economic Education. We're doing Eye on the Empire. Never a shortage of stuff to talk about. Good evening to you, Scott.
Hey, how are you doing, Jeff? Good to talk to you again.
Yeah, it's good to talk to you. It's been a big, eventful week this week, I'd say. We got Trump in the news. You and I talked about about that on your podcast the other day. We've got a new survey on race relations in America. We've got new evidence of, police abuse all over the place. Another thing I'd like to talk to you about is this New York Times article. I don't know if you saw it. That said, foresees the end of Christianity, and sort of the war-torn regions of the Middle East and surrounding areas being driven out. And I find that very interesting in a way because. This has fascinating implications for U.S. foreign policy, right?
Sure. Well, of course, it's all the fault of American foreign policy. Is that where you want to start then?
Yeah, why don't we just do that? Because I'm intrigued by it because the article is very well documented. I think it might be the cover of the New York Times Magazine today, and it's a concern because not because the whole world must be Christian or something like that. It's that it's all happening by force, and as a kind of blowback for U.S. foreign policy. You talk about a case of sort of unintended consequences in a way because the U.S. has been on a kind of a pro-Christian imperialism now for a very long time, 150 years or something, and it's striking that U.S. foreign policy would be responsible for this.
Yeah, well, the Christianity of George Bush basically just amounted to a bunch of magical thinking about how the real world worked. So, when we get there, the people there, they're just nothing but an afterthought. It was supposed to be so easy. And what are they going to do about it? Remember, bring them on? Like, you couldn't imagine that the whole group of those guys, they couldn't imagine that anybody would even try to stand up to the U.S. Army because they weren't thinking about the actual U.S. Army. They were thinking about this magical, force, this mystical force. Pat Robertson swore that George W. Bush had told him, we won't have a single casualty in this war because it's, Jesus is on our side and all this kind of thing. And so, but meanwhile, then they get there and then what do? They overthrow the guy who wakes up and shaves his chin every morning and wears a beret like a Frenchman. And they overthrow him and turn the whole place over to sectarian murderers of various factions. And so the Ba'athist nationalists, under the Saddam Hussein regime, I don't know exactly how it was before that, but he had a real monopoly on force around there. And so all the different kinds of Yazidis and Druze and Turkmen and the different factions of Christians, which there are Syrian and Chaldean Christians. I don't know if they're Maronites there. Maybe that's just a Syrian thing. But anyway, a couple of, pretty important factions of Christians that go back to the very beginning there in Mesopotamia, who I don't know exactly their story, how they got there, but it was very soon after that era, 2,000 years ago. And they've now been scattered to the winds. Last I heard, most of them ended up in refugee camps in Syria. Well, then America set Syria on fire too. So now where the hell are they supposed to go? There's more refugees from the Syria conflict than there were from Iraq, or as many, 3-4 million people. And of course, the Palestinians are still stuck in their refugee camps in Syria. They've got nowhere to go. I don't know where the Syrian refugees are going. To Iraq? Iraq can't be any better than there. It's all under the control of the Islamic State. So they're trying to, I don't know, as many of them as they can, go to Lebanon, go cling on to a raft out in the Mediterranean Sea if they can get that far to the west. But it's a disaster. And right now, think back to this, Jeffrey, and anybody, you don't have to be like a master of the history of the Iraq war to know it's a cliche at this point that when they overthrew Saddam, then when they really screwed up was they completely fired every Ba'athist in the government, which was everybody. They didn't just overthrow Saddam, they overthrew the entire state and they abolished the entire army and said, let's start over from scratch. And everybody says, oh man, that really did it. Now, I don't know that they really had a choice. They should have just left. They should have never gone. But the Shiite majority was going to insist on having their majority rule one way or the other anyway at that point. But still, that's the cliche, is that they just left this gigantic power vacuum. And so then they helped the Shiite militias push the Sunni population right in the arms of the Zarqawiyite terrorist types. And so now here we are all these years later, we're fighting for the Zarqawiyites, for the bin Laden types in Syria against the also Ba'athist but Shiite minority dictatorship there. And what's the goal? What's the stated mission? To de-Ba'athify the government and abolish the army and overthrow the state. Well, then what's going to happen to all of the sectarian minorities that support Assad? And by the way, many, many Sunnis support Assad too. It's just the very poorest people out from the countryside and the mercenaries sent in by the Americans and the Saudis who are fighting. But they're, huge Sunni populations that still support the government of Assad. And so do all of the Druze, and I guess at least some of the Kurds, all of the Shia, all of the Alawites, and all of the Christians. And that includes Christians that speak Aramaic from back 2,000 years ago, the language of Jesus. One of these towns, I forget the name of the town, it was this really cool place, man, where it was kind of like in this very narrow valley, and much of the town was built up in the rocks and up on the side of the hill. And that had been seized by Jabhat al-Nusra, the basically Syria, Al-Qaeda in Syria, for a little while there back in 2013. All the people have been driven out, although I don't think they were all killed. They were driven out, and then eventually they got their town back, at least for now. But this is the policy America is still continuing on. So now think of how stupid and horrible Iraq War II was under George W. Bush. But imagine if at the time that Bush invaded the country, Saddam had been in the middle of a war against a bunch of bin Ladenite terrorists. If Saddam was fighting Zarqawi, basically, and then our mission was to go and get rid of the guy with the clean-shaven chin and the beret in favor of the terrorists, that's our policy right now in Syria. So as bad as it is, Jeff, what the U.S. government is trying to do right now is make it that much worse. Maybe infinitely worse. I mean, maybe so bad where we're talking about the complete, obliteration of these cultures off the face of the earth. Never mind the individual humans who are suffering under all.
I don't understand this because, in the Middle Ages, Islam was always very tolerant towards Christians. They were a protected class of citizens. There was something approximating religious freedom, at least the dawn of it, between the 8th and the 14th century. I mean, we know that Islam has a heritage of religious toleration. I mean, how do you account for the rise of this extremism and this how did Christianity become demonized in the region?
Well, I don't know about the larger question there, other than just it being identified more and more as a Western religion, and the thing that foreign and probably especially white imperialists from far away think and believe in. American foreign policy has been really bad for brand Christianity as far as that goes.
Yeah.
The same as Israel, the way Israel behaved ended up helping to get a lot of Jews kicked out of Middle Eastern states where they'd lived for thousands of years, like Egypt, for example. The thing of it too is, never mind Islam or just the population of Iraq. I mean, when America came in there and started a war and, overthrew the entire government, and then it's a battle for state power. It's a battle of all the local factions. So the meanest militia wins. So we're not necessarily talking about how Islam treats Christianity. We're talking about, how does the Badr Brigade treat the Christian minority? How does Al-Qaeda in Iraq, how do, the very worst, most extremists on either side of that civil war, including the U.S. Army for that matter, how do they treat these people? Well, they're in the way. And, and when you're talking about the worst of the fighters, these guys tend to adopt, or at least the rhetoric and the cloak of the most extremist kind of, religious systems too, and become the most oppressive and start. So like the Islamic State right now, for example, which is run by basically Osama himself, this guy Baghdadi that's running it. If you don't convert, you have to pay a tax. And in fact, they might just exile you or kill you anyway. And the same thing with al-Nusra in in Syria right now. They told the Druze, no, we'll let you live, but you have to convert to what we say or else. So, and then they massacred a bunch of them to make their point. So
I mean, what you get here is a pattern developing that anytime the state gets involved, whether it's through war or even domestic policy, and we can get to this, what you see is the differences between people exacerbated, and an exterminationist sort of longings, at the worst, began to prevail. But at the very least, what it means is that the possibilities for toleration and mutual coexistence and that sort of thing come to be diminished insofar as the state's managing the operation.
Right. Well, and the best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. So, and that's the story of humanity. What's going on at the Book of Prison is the guys who are intent in creating a totalitarian dictatorship for Sunnistan are working very hard on their plans, while everybody else is playing cards or hanging around or just wanting to go home and see their girl again or whatever. The guys who know what they're doing, have the meanest agenda, are the ones who are the most committed to carrying it out. And this has been the argument against the Syria against America backing the jihadist side in the Syria civil war, is they keep saying, oh, we're backing the moderates, but the moderates don't fight in a volunteer, bin Ladenite suicide bomber civil war. Moderates sell their guns that you give them to guys who don't mind dying, who go out there and who are willing to do what it takes to try to fight and win. And so, what moderates? There are no moderates. The whole thing from the entire time has been, the whole field dominated by the most bin Ladenite head chopping suicide bomber, lunatics there in the al-Nusra Front and now the Islamic State. And yet they still won't change their policy. They still insist. Barack Obama, as far as I know, the last time he said this was in 2012. But then 2 weeks ago, he said again that Assad must step aside. Not that would be really nice to have as an outcome of negotiations, but this is where negotiations must begin. And so, in other words, just like remember in Kosovo 1999, when they gave the Rambouillet Accord to Milosevic, and it said basically he had to step down, he had to turn over the entire government to NATO, every square inch of the territory of the capital city, everything belonged to NATO from now on. It was the offer he couldn't possibly accept, in order to, so that they could say, see, he wouldn't accept our peace accord, and so now we have to bomb him. And it's the same kind of ultimatum here, where Assad cannot, what's he going to do? He's going to quit? Really? No, the war is just going to continue. That's all.
Well, and the response on the part of Americans towards this kind of thing is going to be, I assume, given that we're talking about the American Christian bourgeoisie, is not going to be, oh, look, U.S. foreign policy has produced a terrible backlash in a way that's actually hurt Christians in the region. It's going to be just the opposite. It's going to be like, well, we better ramp it up. I mean, the biggest applause line that Donald Trump delivered when I heard him in Vegas, concerned his anti-ISIS comments and his warmongering stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and of course, all devoid of any real knowledge or context. So he says, we go in there and wipe them out. Well, what do you mean? I mean, they're basically pseudo guerrillas. They're barely a state. Clearly, if you go there, meaning, say, Mosul, they're going to be hiding among the population. So wipe them out now includes all the women and children of Mosul too, or doesn't it? Or what? Blowhard demagogue like him doesn't have an answer to that. He wants people to imagine, yeah, ISIS is going to send all their men out to meet us out on flat land in the middle of the desert where we can just drop JDAMs on their head or whatever, which is, of course, not the way it happens, not the way it could happen. So what he's really saying is go in there and nuke them all, which is what I expect to hear from Republican voters, frankly. But Republican presidential candidates are supposed to be a little bit better than just, the kind of crap that, and I do hear this from, Texans believe, many, probably millions of Texans would tell you what we should do is just drop all hydrogen bombs on them until they're all dead, all their women and all their children. And then we'll just have mankind less Arabs from now on, and it'll be great. And they mean it. They'd be happy to see that happen. And they would deserve the nuclear fallout to come as the blowback from it. But that's their attitude.
Well, I said it was Donald Trump's biggest applause line. Actually, his biggest applause line that I heard recently was He said that he wants to bring back a country in which our nuclear stockpile matters again.
Yeah, what a great phrase is that. No, really, I'll use them. I'll use them. I'm not playing.
That's what he's saying.
And of course, you know, America's national security strategy since the advent of the bomb has been, we reserve the right to use nuclear first strikes. That's it. Obama revised that and said, instead of we reserve the right to use nuclear first strikes against any nation in the world, we now only reserve the right to use nuclear first strikes against any nuclear armed power or Iran. So everybody else, you're off the hook unless somebody frames you up for an attack on us, in which case we might nuke you all to death. But that's the official stated policy of the United States government, is that regardless of Nuremberg or whatever you might have heard, we reserve the right to start wars and to use nukes to do it.
I can't remember the last time a presidential candidate has bragged about the U.S. nuclear stockpile, actually. That was new to me. I haven't heard about that stuff since the 80s.
Well, you know, I don't think he really thinks these things through before he says them. He just gets up there and says some things that he thinks. You know, like, I guess he probably has a general direction of where he wants to go up there, whatever. You know, another thing is we could drop nukes on people. I don't know. He doesn't know any arguments why not to, really. Yeah. Probably if he was at the casino at night, everybody around would go, yeah, you're here. Yeah. So he's a man of limited experience. You know, he probably hasn't heard Daniel Ellsberg warn of the dangers of nuclear war, you know?
Yeah. You know, it's clownish, and everybody's treating him that way, but
not everybody.
Well, I'm not entirely so sure that it's right to just disregard this guy. For one thing, the Republicans have to accommodate him and his supporters, or else risk a third-party run. You know.
Oh, by the way, I thought of you yesterday when I saw this thing at Think Progress that said, "Hey, you know, maybe Donald Trump ain't so bad after all, guys."
Really?
Yeah, and it was because they had a great quote from him about the Iraq War. We're saying, all these young kids with their hands and their faces blown off for nothing. And it was right after the war started in 2003. It was like spring or early summer 2003. And he said something really hardcore about it. Not just our guys, but their young men too. Their faces blown off. Like, you know, he's kind of going off about it. So I like that quote. Not that he did anything about it with all his billions of dollars. We could have used that money over at antiwar.com, I'll tell you what. But anyway, but he's also said absolutely horrible things about Iraq. Like, well, as long as we went there, they owe us all that oil, or else we invaded them for nothing. And so we should kill them and take all their gasoline, and just completely ridiculous things.
Yeah,
like
totally erratic. I mean, he has no philosophy whatsoever.
No, he's just throwing darts.
Yeah, well, to the extent, actually, the point of my article that has gone viral so many times, it's just shocking, actually, how much circulation my article has gotten, was that this is fascism. You know, it's a kind of a randomized statism and assertion of and hurling of power on behalf of, you know, the great man who's you know, heading the country as if it were a single firm.
Yeah, and who's going over the head of all the established institutions straight to the people for
that's right,
power and all that.
Getting rid of the corruption within the system, and
of which there's plenty, yeah, for sure.
There always is. Dictators always arise in the wake of massive political corruption. There's no exception to it, you know. So, you know, everything he says about the existing political system is basically right, you know. So, and that's appealing to people. Yeah.
Well, hey, that's the plot of Star Wars, man. That's how I learned about all this stuff when I was a little kid. They had an old republic, but then it got all corrupt. So
oh my God, you're right.
One of the senators made himself the emperor and cleaned house.
Palpatine.
You know? Yeah.
Right?
He came in there and took care of business.
I should have mentioned him in my article. I forgot about that.
Yeah, there you go.
That was a classic case.
Yeah, absolutely, man.
Well,
like Philip Drew.
And also, you know, he's one of the few people willing to tell the truth about the current system. My favorite line that he said in Vegas was that he pointed out that every single dollar that's being contributed to Republicans to the other candidates right now is going to come back in the form of political favors. That these are investments.
Well, that's why everybody likes him so much, is because he really can tell the truth and say things like, who in power, who with any authority at all would have said, oh, come on, Rick Perry's a complete loser, idiot, moron. He only put those glasses on to try to look smart, which he's not, and it didn't work, right? Like, that's exactly what I might have said on my radio show, right? But to have someone with power say, oh, please, like, you're impressing me with your big glasses. It's just, I mean, it's great. It's great. And you know what? Since Rand Paul is absolutely worthless, it's nice to have somebody entertaining in the campaign. Let's pray it doesn't lead to outright dictatorship worse than it would be under Jeb. But
I don't know. You know, I mean, it's times like this that makes you think that, you know, as bad as the status quo is, it could actually get worse, you know?
Oh, yeah. I mean, Jeb is going to be horrible, but Trump, I mean, who knows what he would do? No, Trump, he's like McCain, where he's loose cannon enough where it's not just a matter of, well, who are his favorite special interests or whatever like that. It's more a question of what mood is he in right now and what that might mean for the rest of mankind, you know?
Yeah, whether he wakes up on the wrong side of the bed or not. Yeah.
I'm completely repeating myself from earlier somewhere, something, I'm sorry, but I read this thing where Nick Gillespie from Reason was talking about the Hillary Clinton emails and how the one thing that he really learned from it was just how unimpressive she is and just what a regular Joe she is. She's just some guy up there, dude. She doesn't know anything. She doesn't know anything. The amount of power that she's wielding compared to her, you know, information, knowledge, wisdom, just forget it. The ratio is so far out of whack. Like, she could basically be the manager of your local grocery store and do a damn good job. Right? But she's not any more special than that. There's nothing any better about her than just any lady you know. She's just some lady. That's it. And yet she wields the power to start a war in Libya if she wants, support Al-Qaeda in Syria if she wants, you know, do whatever the hell. Help Petraeus escalate in Afghanistan and God knows what, the coup in Honduras, and who knows what horrible things she did. You know, turn it all in North Africa into a freaking nightmare is what she did. And she's just some boob. She's just some idiot.
And he said this because basically she just added her email properties to her iPhone and was writing people back and forth.
I guess, yeah, it was just like the nature of the chit chat, that there was never anything like really that betrayed like there's something really heavy going on here. You know what I mean? This could be any bureaucrat at any office. Right. Communicating with her staff, trying to get a handle on what's going on and just barely getting a handle on it. You know, she could be in other words, she's interchangeable with any, you know, professional educated lady, you know, but who's not, you know, there's no all the so-called mystique that where people assume, they kind of fill in the excluded middle and they just assume, well, there must be something really smart about her. There must be something really special, or else how could she be so accomplished? But the real answer is just because she wanted to be so accomplished. That's all. She wanted to climb that ladder and do so well. And that doesn't mean anything else, really.
And it represents something about the American political system, too. I mean, this level of incompetence. You know, I've been thinking recently, you know, throughout most of American history, you know, we have these elections every 4 years, and you know, you talk about mystique. We like to imagine that the people who are running are somehow embodying the current ethos of the nation. You know, that there's some sense that they you know, personify the cultural and political moments of our time. But that's no longer true. I mean, we live in a different world today than we lived 4 years ago during the last election, or whenever it was, 3 years ago or something. And I mean, we've been in a dramatic state of sort of technological and cultural and social upheaval thanks to the advance of markets. But then we have these elections that come along, and so now we've got a year when all these idiots are running, and they sound like, you know, they're running to rule the world in 1992. They have very little connection to the digital age whatsoever. Meanwhile, you know, we're progressing, you know, every day with the mobile applications, with new technologies, new communication systems. You know, the spread of smartphones, talking to people as never before. I mean, all the platforms that have developed, all the peer-to-peer technologies, from cryptocurrency to, you know, turning every house or empty room in America to a potential hotel room, and the destruction of the municipal taxi monopolies and everything. All these great things are happening, and then we have to stop this and do this idiotic ritual of electing a leader. You know, there's something particularly absurd about the whole ritual this year.
Well, and about knowing that it can only be worse. It's only going to get worse with these guys.
They can only do
bad as the current guy is. Every single other person is, well, the ones that you actually have to pick from, Jeb or Walker or Hillary or, you know, whatever. That's probably.
Well, your implications of what you just said are actually astounding. I mean, I must say that you know, I've never been a fan of Barack Obama, although I've never been like a hater on the level of a lot of the Republicans, but I've never really liked him. But his whole prison reform thing is actually like a positive thing. It was too little, it's too late.
Yeah.
But it's actually a wonderful thing. I didn't realize until the other day that he was the first president, sitting U.S. president, ever visited a federal penitentiary. You would think that would be like the first thing you do.
I don't know what he's actually doing about it, though. Is he actually doing something, or he's just?
Well, he's pardoned a lot of people, and you know, I mean, not a lot, but I mean, yeah, I guess like 47 or something like that. And he's, I don't know, he's given a lot of speeches. He's introduced the topic. I mean, it's not to be congratulated, really, but there's an element, I think, of what looks like something approximating some minor element of sincerity here, you know, and
yeah.
You know what I mean. So you know, I mean, it's like, you know, as soon as he starts doing some slight bit of good for the world, you know, he's leaving the office. And probably the reason he's doing this is because he's a lame duck, right? So he doesn't have to be political.
Well, yeah, he's taking advantage. He's saying, oh, I guess I could, you know, lay down and do nothing for 2 years, or I can just do whatever I want. Some of the things we'll like and some of the things we'll hate. The Iran deal is, of course, what's most important to me that, you know, I definitely approve of.
Well,
and I'd be happy to see some real criminal justice reform if I thought he was really going to do something about it.
So, yeah. So, I mean, in those two instances, and maybe there's more, we actually see him doing some.
But then just think of when Jeb comes, it's going to be all of the worst neocons right back in the Pentagon and the State Department. Dude, well, probably have Victoria Nuland as Secretary of State.
Oh, geez. Yeah, it's just unthinkable. No matter what the outcome is, it's going to be unthinkable. The other great thing about Barack Obama is that he was so thoroughly humbled by the, you know, the catastrophe he never admits, but Obamacare has been a disaster and much worse than anybody ever expected, actually. I mean, it's been universally bad for just about everybody.
Well, and it hasn't even been all the way implemented yet, right? Just wait until it actually breaks.
Worse and worse. A lot of people thought that if they had healthcare through their companies, that they would be protected from this. But actually, the premiums have gone way up. The coverage has gone way down. And now companies are typically charging for dependents, you know, wives and children and husbands, whatever. Whereas before they were letting the whole families in. Now, you know, it's just to keep the balance sheet right. Insurers are having to cut back and back and back while ostensibly offering ever more generous packages, but that don't actually mean anything in reality. So the whole implementation of the thing was terrible. I mean, it's worse than, and I had very low expectations, but it's been far worse. And I think Obama is aware of this to some extent. So you've got a little bit of a humbling effect, because this is, you know, the biggest, most gigantic, you know, sort of comprehensive government reform of a single sector of American life in a very long time, and it amounted to absolutely nothing, which is one of the reasons we haven't really seen any big initiatives since then. I mean, that's sort of more or less the kind of president you want. I mean, you want a president who threw everything at one program and it was a big disaster, and now is extremely risk averse, you know? And that seems like where we're headed with Barack Obama. I mean, there's an element of tragedy in the fact that he has to be kicked out now.
Yeah. Well, boy, yeah, and I hate to agree with that, as crazy as it sounds. I think everybody understands what we mean. That's no praise for him.
No, I mean, it's actually funny when you think about it, because we're both like both radicals and revolutionaries, but you know, given the existing realities, since it only seems like no matter any change is actually going to be worse.
Repeal the 22nd Amendment. Keep the precedent.
You're like, you know, suddenly the establishment and the status quo doesn't look so bad compared to anything.
I like this president. Everybody hates him, so he's weak as I want a president to be, basically. You know, this is why, you know, people used to say in 2000, people would ask, you know, about the election. And I'd say, well, I'm voting for Harry Brown, of course, but if I, you know, gun to my head, I had to choose between Bush Gore, I guess I have to choose Junior because he's such a freaking clown and such an idiot. I know him already as Governor Bush for years now, so I already know what a nitwit this guy is. And I'm thinking, you know, unlike Clinton, who can get up there and answer your question in complete sentences and stuff like that, Junior has a real problem. And so the fact of what a clown I know him to be, I hope will really diminish his stature as a president, and he'll basically be able to get away with nothing. And of course, you know, if you remember the first 9 months of his presidency, everybody was like, you barely know he's there. Thank God, you know?
That was beautiful. It was
it could have been. Oh, what could have been. But then after his greatest failure of all presidents ever in American history, he was revered like a god king sent down to take us to war to protect us from Saddam or whatever crazy nonsense people were made to believe back then.
He got a new lease on life and a new mandate. Yeah, that was the worst.
But yeah, no, but the point being, I would love to have, and you know, put Jimmy Carter back in there. Everybody hates Jimmy Carter. There's a powerless, do nothing loser. That's what kind of president we need.
I know. You know, I just read an article about Carter the other day, or I read an interview with him. You know, it's a very interesting figure, Jimmy Carter. I mean, he got such a bum rap for all the bad economic stuff that happened under his watch, but actually he avoided war with Iran. Despite the fact that the American bourgeoisie was screaming for war, he could have just so easily gone to war and boosted his popularity. He didn't do it. Passed the only deregulatory measures that have ever occurred in the American regime in my lifetime. I mean, that's extraordinary. Between 1978 and their implementation in 1980, it was trucking and telecommunications. Really, I mean, there was something like half a dozen deregulations, banking that occurred in those years. Oil decontrol, and it was beautiful. I mean, he set the U.S. up for an actual improvement in public policy. I mean, so Carter is, and not to mention the fact that he's actually seems like a fairly sincere fellow. I mean, maybe if I knew him better and I had to deal with him directly, I'd have a different view. But my general impression is that he's a little bit of a pietist and sort of sincere, and still out there doing the thing. He's 90 years old now. Yeah, I would love to have Jimmy Carter for president. I'm totally with you.
Yeah, I mean, anyway, we're screwed though, because it's not going to be like that. And I don't think it'll be Hillary. And I don't know why anybody thinks that she's electable. It's amazing to me that the establishment believes that they ought to give the nomination to her. If they want the Democratic Party, I mean, I guess whatever. She's just a jobber for Jeb. Then I guess that makes sense.
Isn't Sanders actually like getting more people to turn out to his?
Yeah, but that doesn't matter. I mean, he's not going to be able to line up the money. It's all about the establishment chooses, not us. We get to choose from among who they choose.
So you think it's going to be Hillary, but she's going to lose?
Yeah. Okay. I mean, Jeb, actually, I admit, well, here's a couple of my caveats here. Now I'm adding to my Jeb rant. My caveats are, he is dumber than I thought, Jeff. He is as dumb as Junior, or almost as dumb as Junior. Totally not impressed by him. And I just thought that, come on, he can't be as dumb as Junior, for Christ's sake, right? But nah, he's actually seems pretty kind of dull-witted. So, he could make just such a lousy impression. I don't know. But I think, so far he's on the gravy train. He's on the grease skids to the nomination unless something terrible happens. And I used to say, unless he accidentally says the N-word in front of an open microphone. But the other possibility is Donald Trump could just say, well, never even mind the rest of these clowns. Jeb Bush is my enemy, and I'm going to destroy him. And he's kind of turning the whole damn table over.
I have to believe he's pulling Bush. I mean, is pulling high just simply because of the name recognition thing. I mean, these people are just incredibly uninterested in politics, and they'll say anything to get rid of the pollster.
But if you poll, Wall Street, the banks and insurance companies, the arms dealers, the pill pushers, agribusiness, the Israelis, and old people, the people who count. Those are that's democracy in America right there. Oh, oil. I always leave out oil on the way. They go on the list too. Those are the power factions in America. And if you poll them, they'll go, Jeb. And they're not interested either. They're just, yeah, whatever, Jeb. It's going to be him. And there's no one else. I mean, who are they going to have? Rubio is going to get the nomination? No way. It's going to be Jeb. And unless, I guess Trump could ruin it for him, and I'd be happy to see him ruin it for Trump. And in fact, here's the funny part of that Think Progress article where they're like, surprisingly, this fascist doesn't seem too bad to us progressives. Yes, that's quite surprising. But anyway, at the bottom, though, and they call him out for being a nativist and stuff. But at the bottom, they go, but really, what is less legitimate about him compared to Carly Fiorina or Ted Cruz or Marco Rubio or Jeb Bush, for that matter, or any of these clowns? And that's exactly what I'm saying, is that actually, I mean, I get what you're saying, that he's a know-nothing enough to a steamroller enough to be like a real dictator compared to just a really, really bad Republican president. But when it comes to the things that he believes, like, he is a Fox News viewer. That's what he is. He's a Republican. He's exactly what they are, only he says it all out loud without any inhibition.
This is the thing I did not go into in my article, but
that doesn't mean he's as qualified as them, as the way Think Progress put it. It means, look, the entire Republican Party is a gigantic, corrupt, bankrupt, fascist, alien enterprise in our society. It has no place in our society. Why should we accept this?
That they've cleaned up their act. Did you see that Salon Magazine ran a big article on Trump as a fascist, in which they cited me up at the top of the article and a lot of quotes from me, which is just, I mean, the irony there, because the guy is a big lefty, right? I mean, I'm sure a very nice guy or whatever. And he conveniently leaves out my main thesis, which is that Trump is a state builder, and that there's a kind of a right-wing form of socialism that differs culturally from the left-wing version. That was my basic theme, and
they missed all that.
but that just fell out of the article completely, which is fine. Although he retained all my links to Mises and John T. Flynn, which is very charming. So we've got a funny thing going on there. But
well, it is fun to watch the reaction to Trump. People are just completely hysterical about it,
Well, and this guy at Salon was saying something I did not say in my article, which is actually a salient point, which is that, what does it say about the Republican voters that he's ahead right now?
Yeah.
I mean, that's very revealing. I've always believed this, by the way. Sam Francis. Did you ever know that name?
Barely. Yeah, I'm somewhat familiar, but not.
Yeah, so he was Sam was a brilliant guy. Not at all my kind of take on the world, but he always believed that he had a very, very dark view. He believed that fascism is the real ideology of the white bourgeoisie. That's sort of that large majorities of people basically go for fascism, and that any powerful leader who could ever tap into that could make himself a dictator at any time. And I should clarify that Sam wasn't necessarily opposing this. Okay, he was a realpolitik sort of thinker.
I totally agree with that. Look, if George Bush had decided to just keep pushing it and pushing it and pushing it and pushing it, at what point would the Republican, conservative, right-wing population of America turn against him? At no point. I mean, here he's torturing people to death. He's starting wars. He's taking their sons and getting them killed, lying right to their stupid faces, and they love it. They'd be happy to wage war against you for knowing better than them.
Yeah. That's right. And so
I mean, Bush, there were a couple times where Bush was like, they wanted to arrest the Lackawanna Six framed up in a bogus, oh no, they were paintballing in the woods. They must be terrorists kind of thing. Well, Dick Cheney said, send the army to arrest him. This is in Lackawanna, New York, outside Buffalo, New York. And Junior said, nah, I'm going to send the FBI. But the lawyers, Dick Cheney and his lawyers were saying, yeah, we could roll a tank down the street and send in the infantry and set a precedent here about how we deal with terrorists on American soil. So Bush was like, nah, and he called the governors and he said, governors, I'd appreciate it if you guys would call out the state guard to stand around at the airports. He could have called them out himself. He could have called them out and had them stationed all over the goddamn place, but he didn't do that. So in other words, he did not go as far as he could have. And as far as the American population and especially the Republican base were concerned, he could have gone 10 times as far, and there's no limit. He could have started putting commies and hippies and Mexicans in concentration camps and got away with it.
God, I totally agree with that. I mean, there's no amount of statism that a sizable majority of the white middle class would not accept, provided you don't attack their religion and you don't raise taxes and you don't cut the military budget. Basically, you know, those are the sticking issues for people. They want their national greatness, they want their stuff, and they want their religion, their families left alone. Basically, you get that right, you're Caesar.
Yeah, well, and we have a real problem here, because if you look at the polls, you see that the military is the only institution, the only permanent institution in America that people trust. They don't trust the Congress. They don't trust the courts or the presidency. They don't trust their local cops or the mayor or you know, their town council or county court or whatever it is. But the military, now those guys know how to get things done, which of course is not true, right? The military is the most bumbling, ridiculous, socialistic institution.
And actually, let me ask you about that. Isn't it the case? Let me just ask you this, because it's you would know the answer to this, and I've never entirely understood it. But is it not the case that the military as an establishment tends to be less militaristic than the civilian leadership?
Well, it depends on the issue, I think. But yeah, most of the time. I mean, they want to make sure there's no cuts, that they get to keep their jobs. I don't think they really care if they got to fight or not. They want to fight just enough to have something to do, I think.
Right.
You know, like what they're doing in Africa right now is probably just up the Army's alley, where here they get to just embed small units with all the different 52 nations of Africa, with all of their different militaries, and train their militaries and come up with small things to do. But boy, it's a big continent, boss. We need more men. We need more money. And they can kind of keep that thing going forever. They really want to invade and occupy Iraq again? Nah. I mean, the Air Force is down for it. But, and this is a big fight that's going on right now between the services, actually, is that the Navy and the Air Force want doctrine to be all centered around fighting China, which, again, is armed with hydrogen bombs and could kill all of us. I mean, they only have a couple of dozen, but that's enough to take out all of our major cities, a couple of dozen major cities, and destroy our civilization. Anyway, they want to fight, or at least they want to sell planes and collect their pensions and whatever in the name of preparing to fight China. Well, and the Marines, they roll with the Navy wherever they go, right? So the Army feels left out. So the Army's all upset, and for a while they fought the entire creation of this so-called land-air battle, what they call it, or air-sea battle is what they call it. And then they try to kind of weasel their way in there, and now they've just said, forget it, we'll just pivot to Africa. So the Air Force and the Navy get to pivot to China, and the Army gets to pivot to Africa, but it's all just make work, right? And none of it has anything to do really with even the slightest thing to do with protecting us. It's all just about, staying employed at current wages. But then when the Hawks push for bombing Iran, they go, nah. Like the Air Force says, yeah, we'll do it. But everybody else says, no way, Jose. Because the Marines and the Army know they'll have to go in and take out the anti-aircraft. They're going to go when this whole thing turns into a giant disaster. They're going to be the ones who have to try to occupy.
I mean, there's a sense in which the polls that show the military is more trusted than any other civilian institution of government. There may be some justification for that.
Well, yeah, maybe. I mean, they are somewhat reluctant, but I mean, look at what happened with Libya, where Hillary Clinton wanted to do it. The military and the CIA tried to stop her. The president sided with her. Military did it. They followed their orders. They did the damn war anyway, and they really did try to stop her. It's amazing the lengths to which, in fact, even the head of AFRICOM, General Ham, personally intervened and was negotiating with Gaddafi. You got the generals at the Pentagon are negotiating while Hillary Clinton, the Secretary of State, is trying to start the damn war. And so I mean, we've seen this a couple of times here recently, where and same thing in Yemen. But it's a question of who's on whose side, right? The Air Force and the Navy are happy as hell to bomb jihadists in Iraqistan, whatever, in the Islamic State right now. But they don't want to bomb Yemen, because in Yemen, Obama's got them fighting on the side of Al-Qaeda. and against Al-Qaeda's worst enemies, the Houthis, that America's bombing the Houthis. And so you have it, and of course, again, they still do their damn job anyway. They don't resign it over it because of honor or anything ridiculous like that, like in all their slogans. They do it anyway, but they're reluctant and they advise against it. Gee whiz, Mr. President, you sure you want us to be Al-Qaeda's Air Force? Okay, sir, yes, sir. And they carry out the business, And they say, in fact, Mark Perry is the source of kind of both of those rants I just went on there about the air-sea battle and Yemen too. And he quotes generals saying, John McCain complains that we're Iran's Air Force in Iraq. Well, we're Al-Qaeda's Air Force in Yemen. So I like that, So, and again, they're still doing it, but they're pissed off about it and making it known. So, yeah, I mean, you may be right. It's that the problem is whatever mission. So right now they may be the most trusted institution as long as they're sitting at their bases, that's fine. But instead what they're doing mostly is waging war overseas and ruining other people's countries and bankrupting us. And then when the real bankruptcy comes due, then we have a real choice, whether we, turn to demagogues like Donald Trump and turn to generals like, whatever perfumed prince gets put up before us as, the most competent man in America, or whether we believe in peace or not.
This is the real fear. I mean, a lot of my friends are looking forward to some gigantic economic collapse as if it's, going to be some sort of vindication of all their predictions and everything. I think it's the single worst thing that could happen to us between now and 18 months from now. I mean, I don't even want to look at the world, what's going to happen under those conditions, because so far things are kind of going along swimmingly, and so long as there's not some gigantic crisis. But, under crisis conditions, oh my God, it was just, we'll stop laughing about Trump and start crying, I think, under those conditions.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And, I went and saw a recent speech by Ron Paul where he just kept hitting this over and over again. We're listen, everybody, no matter what happens, okay? It was almost like, I don't know. I hope it wasn't his last big speech, but it kind of sounded like it, where he's going, listen, no matter what happens, just stick with liberty and it'll work out. Prices got to be able to float, man. People got to be able to make deals. You don't have enough information. No one has enough information to decide except the people deciding among themselves. And he was like, it was almost like it was really urgent that, listen, there's going to be a day where things are really bad. And at that point, don't believe in power. They're going to try to get you to believe in power. Don't let it work on you. We need freedom. That's all we need.
Well, I was thrilled too to see Ron jump out in front on this Donald Trump issue and just say that guy's an authoritarian. I mean, he's like no compromise. None of this nonsense. I mean, he was just like, this guy is just all around bad. So that made me proud of my old friend.
Yep.
I want to. If we don't have that much time left, I wanted to draw your attention to the New York Times poll about race relations in America, which I found very interesting. I mean, it's an illustration of the faulty hopes that people have in politics. Apparently, when Barack Obama was elected, most people, blacks and whites, 2/3, were very optimistic about race relations in America. They thought they were good and expected them to improve. So after all this time with, the nation's first black president, all the rest of it, now we've seen a complete reversal of those expectations. Now 2/3 of blacks and whites both say race relations are worse than they've ever been. And the polling has never been this bad since the Rodney King episode, all those years ago. But what I found most interesting about the whole poll is that if you look in detail at the figures, what you find is, once you take apart the data, what you find is that something like 77% of both blacks and whites say that in their local communities, relations between the races are good. Mm-hmm. And it's very interesting, this sort of the difference between the micro perspective and the macro perspective. And what I wrote in the article today is, what do we mean by in our local communities? When we say in my local community, what do we mean? What we mean is, for the most part, our commercial activities. It's at our workplaces, the places we trade with, the stores we shop in. In other words, our real lives. In our real lives, there is not a race conflict. It's, for the most part, everybody gets along. We find ways to cooperate and trade and get rich together, get more prosperous together, at least, you know, find ways towards peace. But once you take it out of that realm and put it into the realm of politics, that's when things start getting grim. And right now they're at a low ebb. And I think it's partially because of a widespread perception of, you know, the police abuse videos that are going on. The media always exploits, you know, to try to divide people and never to our benefit, you know. You know, what I argued was that what this poll shows is that insofar as you use official institutions, you know, whether it's the criminal justice system or the court system or cops or whatever, as mediating forces between groups, that you're going to create greater degrees of conflict. Whereas if you just allow peer-to-peer contact between people in a marketplace, that you're going to get better outcomes. That's what I discern from the polls.
Yeah, no, it makes total sense. And of course, it's easy to see why, especially for blacks who are on the receiving end of the worst violence, that, you know, they got to imagine that, you know, maybe the average white guy doesn't have that much political power, but he must have more political power than me. And I don't see him making an effort to get the police to stop cracking my skull open.
That's right.
If he's not going to stick up for me, then, you know, whatever. What chance do I have sticking up for myself when I'm the one getting my head cracked open, kind of
thing?
You know, so it's all what the cops do ends up, it gets all muddied with just racism in general. Where, so like you're saying, in my neighborhood, it's a very mixed neighborhood. Everybody gets along. It's a colorblind neighborhood as far as that goes. I don't think anybody notices.
Yeah, look, I live in Atlanta. I mean, you know, this is the multiracial capital of the world. I mean, it's beautiful.
But the cops are insane. And they're far more likely to, you know, take out whatever, to do what they think they can get away with to black people than white people, just because there's less chance that a black person is politically connected.
It's right? So
you crack some white guy with blonde hair, his head open, he might be the son of a state senator or something like that. You know, I think chance, you know.
This has been a consciousness raising moment for white America, because I think a lot of people lived in denial of this, and I'm including myself. I was, you know, very much unaware of the extent of the problem, but the problem is revealed in the polling. I mean, it turns out, like, a general question asked of people is something like, you know, have you ever experienced you know, unjust intimidation or felt threatened by the police? 5% of whites said they have. 41% of blacks. Okay, this is a gigantic difference, and you know,
both of those numbers sound way low to me too.
They do. They sound low to me too, actually. Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, only 41%. I would think it's more like 90. Yeah, no.
The thing is too, you know, I think like you said earlier, the technology is changing, and it's Facebook and Twitter more than anything else, where these cop videos, you know, I think I mentioned this to you before on the show, where different friends of mine who are not political people, but are just, you know, regular human beings with day jobs and families and stuff, say to me, hey man, you know, I don't know about the wars and this and that, but one thing I've noticed lately on Facebook, man, it's just nonstop police brutality all day, every day. It's not all murders of unarmed black guys. It's also, look at them savagely beating this old white lady too, and whatever it is, maybe almost to death or whatever. And there's a million of them. It goes on all day, every day. It's inescapable with the social media. And, you know, it's we used to have Rather, Jennings, and Brokaw, you know, on the nightly news kind of thing is what people had. But now they're under the impression, and they would be right, I think, to say, like, hey, we're all black people now when it comes to police brutality.
Right. That's exactly
so unleashed. And the reason we can hear black people's voices now better because of social media too, but also if it's now as bad for white people as it's always been for blacks, think of how much worse it is for blacks. Again, probably now it's, you know, it's not mass, you know, lynching from trees necessarily like back in the days, but still, I think things have probably been getting much, much worse with all the militarization and all the.
I'm sorry, I don't remember the name of the lady who killed herself with a trash bag, at least alleged to. But everybody's watched that video where she was stopped and the cop told her to put out a cigarette, you know, and then it escalated, and then she's beaten and dragged off to jail, and next thing you know, she's dead, right? This all
And that
happened.
could happen to anybody. More likely someone like her, but that could happen to anybody, really.
Yeah. And you know what? I couldn't believe it, this, Scott, because I don't know if you saw that there was a big brouhaha, because over the last 24 hours, I guess, the more extended version of the video came out. And so the conservative commentariat was going, oh, well, it turns out there's more to the story. It wasn't just that she had an illegal lane change, because, you know, the cop pulled her over. And so, I mean, if a cop comes behind you and turns on his lights and says, get over, I mean, are you turning on your blinker necessarily to change the next lane? I mean,
apparently you better.
Yeah. So he stops her, and then he says, well, I'm stopping you for not for not signaling for a lane change. Well, he was behind her and told her to
She
pull
was
over.
pulling over for him. Yeah.
Right. So the more extended version of the Sandra Bland, I guess her name is. The more extended version of the video, Breitbart is one of these outfits, you know, said, oh, look, you know, you can see the police actually pulled over for a different reason. And the more extended version, I don't know if you saw this, but she rolled through a stop sign. I mean, that's what caused him to do the U-turn and chase her down. Okay. So I'm looking at this video, and there's nobody on the road at all.
And he didn't say anything, by the way, because the part of it I saw, you know, has him talking. He didn't say anything about a stop sign.
He said about a stop sign, but that's why he originally made the U-turn and chased her down. So you look at like the calculus. I mean, how many times have we been at a stop sign, had a clear, clean view of a completely empty street in both directions, and went, well, I'm just going to turn. You know, I mean, that's sort of
slow enough.
Yeah, and that's what she did. And so he's like, oh, well, it violated the traffic laws. You know, I mean, what they're doing actually is seeking people to tax, essentially. You know,
that's right. That's all.
So he didn't chase her down because she was black, but he chased her down because he saw her as, you know, just another sucker. You know, to pay the local government money. So I mean, in other words, this more extended version of the video didn't somehow vindicate the cop at all.
Yeah, no, of course not. Yeah, like, no, he had every right to do with her whatever she wanted. In fact, right before we went on, someone sent me a link to people on Facebook, you know, who
saying that,
you know, yeah, basically saying anyone who would dare to talk back to a cop gets exactly what they deserve, and we support them against you every time and whatever. And people are just, they can't imagine themselves in that same situation.
No, they can't.
You had to deserved it somehow or another.
Well, there's a long tradition of not going along with the cops. I posted a video earlier today of Fred Astaire, a movie made, I guess, you know, 1937 or something like that, where he's dancing in the street and the cops telling him to stop, and he just sort of dances away and laughs at him, you know. And we're charmed by that. I mean, there's a long tradition, you know, of defying idiot cops, but yeah, no more.
Yeah. Hey, let me say one more thing about all this, as long as we're on it.
Yeah.
Is you know, whatever prejudice and empire and all the rest of it. There's a town outside of Dallas called Farmersville, where they've been having, the whole town is up in arms because a Muslim group wants to build a cemetery there. And they're claiming, oh, come on, they just bury their dead in a sheet and it's going to pollute our groundwater and all this crap, which is total nonsense. They're going to build a giant, you know, I assume concrete vault, and you know, the bodies will be in coffins in the vault, they said. And then, so the quote from, there's two Baptist preachers, and the quote from the evil Baptist preacher is, the next thing you know, they're going to build a mosque and then maybe a madrasa training camp, right? Like, all of a sudden we're talking about Al-Qaeda in Pakistan, right? Like working for the CIA and the Saudis.
That makes me so sad to hear that.
Oh, it's just horrible. But then here's the good news is, there's a good guy, Southern Baptist preacher, who I believe they're the same denomination, but from the other side of town, who just absolutely went out after this guy. And, you know, he starts out his article as kind of demeaning and insulting anyway. And he's saying, well, you know, having to have the state back up your religion. Well, that's how the Muslims are, because their religion is so false and weak and whatever, that they need it that way, which is, you know, what, he's taking their side, but he has to be a jerk about it to prove that he's still one of us or whatever.
Sufficiently anti-Muslim, you know.
But
so
then he really starts getting good and starts saying, you know, I don't worship any God that needs help from the mayor. And no offense, mayor, but my God is badass enough without your assistance. I'm sure he can handle whatever it is. And then he goes on to talk about religious freedom and how here we want to resist gay rights in the name of religious freedom, but we want to take religious freedom away from these Muslims. Well, in 20 years, when the liberals try to take our religion away from us, we're not going to have a thing to say then, are we? If we're going to endorse using the power of government to oppress these people and all this stuff. Like getting really good. Like he didn't quite quote Jefferson, but it was like pretty damn good for a Baptist preacher to say, you know, hey, I'm not afraid of Islam, okay? And how dare anybody say that we should be? This is crazy.
Well,
and you know, also these are Texans. These people have rights, and what I don't know if he got that specific about it. That's of course my only thing. I'm not a religious guy, but these people are human beings. They got the right to believe whatever they want and buy property wherever they want and whatever. And the rest of these people can go jump in a lake is the nice way to put it.
Well, I'm glad to hear that there's at least one Baptist minister in Texas who's still in favor of religious liberty.
In fact, the sermon starts out with, hey, listen, you guys are wrong. And my job is not to tell you what you want to hear. My job, I'm the shepherd, and I tell you when you're screwing up and how you need to fall back in line and start acting right. And he went after him pretty damn good, you know? And said, if I told you what you wanted to hear, then that would mean I love myself more than, you know, what I'm really doing here. And that's not the case. So everybody sit down and shut up and let me tell you why you're screwing up and you need to back off. You know, it was really cool.
That's good.
I'm happy to see it, surprised and pleased to see that, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I always figure that there's probably about a third of the electorate has some humanitarian sensibilities. I don't know about their other 2/3 though.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, the rest of them, man, they'll believe whatever Hannity tells them, I guess. You know, if it's be afraid of these others. You know, I have a friend who, you know, she was talking about people that she knows from a smaller town here in Texas where, you know, like I was talking about before, the kind of people would just say nuke the entire Middle East. All Arabs are terrorists because, you know, whatever, they watch TV and it seems like Arabs are portrayed as terrorists on TV, right? And so, you know, their minds are so small, they don't want to know. They wouldn't want to hear the slightest word in contradiction, you know? Probably never met a Muslim in their lives, you know?
Well, Scott, it's been good talking to you tonight. I'm sorry about the time mix-up. We'll get it right next time.
Yeah, no problem.
This is a little bit spontaneous, but I appreciate you showing up. It's good to get caught up with you. Yeah. You always help me understand the world, so...
Well, I had a lot of fun and happy to do another episode of Eye on the Empire with you. Bye, everybody. Thanks for listening and watching and stuff.
All right. See ya.
See you, man. Next time.